The divorce papers landed on my plate with a soft thud, scattering droplets of coffee across the pristine white porcelain. I watched a brown stain spread across the signature line where my name waited, mockingly empty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sign them, Miranda, David said, his voice flat as he buttered his toast. My lawyer says if you cooperate, this can be done in 6 weeks. I looked up at the man I'd married 9 years ago. The morning light streaming through our breakfast nook windows caught the silver at his temples. Distinguished, everyone said. The CEO of Hartford Medical Systems, they whispered at charity galas. A man going places. They had no idea how right they were, though the place he was going wasn't quite what anyone expected. 6 weeks, I repeated softly, my fingers trembling as I lifted my coffee cup. The trembling wasn't fear. It was the effort of containing my rage. That's very efficient. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel here. David glanced at his Rolex, the one I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. But we both know this marriage has been over for a while. You're a good person, Miranda. You deserve someone who can give you the life you want. The life I want? I almost laughed. If only he knew that everything he had, the house, the car, the prestigious position, it was all because of the life I'd already built. And Vanessa? I asked quietly, watching his jaw tighten. Does she factor into this efficiency? He had the decency to flush. That's not relevant to... Your secretary? I continued, my voice steady despite the coffee cup rattling slightly against the saucer as I set it down. The 26-year-old who just bought a condo in Harbor View? The same complex where you've been spending your late nights at the office? David's eyes narrowed. Have you been following me? I didn't have to. I picked up the papers, scanning the legalese I'd already memorized from the draft his lawyer had accidentally emailed to our shared account last week. You're not as subtle as you think you are. The investigation had taken 3 months. 3 months of watching the man I'd trusted with everything systematically dismantle our life together, while building a new one with someone who giggled at his jokes and called him sir in the office. But the affair was just the surface. What lay beneath was so much worse. Just sign the papers, Miranda. David stood, adjusting his tie. My lawyer is sending over the financial settlement this afternoon. You'll be well taken care of. The house is paid off. You can keep it. I'll maintain your credit cards for 6 months while you transition. How generous. I folded the papers carefully, creasing them with deliberate precision. You'll maintain access to the accounts you've been draining for the past 18 months? His hand froze on his briefcase. What are you talking about? Nothing. I smiled, the same placid smile I'd perfected over 9 years of corporate dinners and fundraising events. The smile that said I was just Miranda Thorne, supportive wife, former paralegal who gave up her career to manage their home. I'll look over these with my lawyer. You don't have a lawyer, David scoffed. And before you panic, I'm not leaving you destitute. The settlement is fair, more than fair. Ask anyone. He didn't wait for a response, just grabbed his briefcase and headed for the garage door. I listened to his Mercedes purr to life, waited for the garage door to close, and then very carefully set down my coffee cup before my hands could start shaking in earnest. 9 years. 9 years I'd played the role of the perfect wife. 9 years of watching him take credit for strategies I'd whispered over pillow talk, of seeing him climb the ladder using connections I'd carefully cultivated, of funding his ascent with money he didn't even know was mine. My phone buzzed. A text from Julian. He made contact? Papers delivered, I typed back. Proceeding with phase 2. The response was immediate. Evidence packages ready. Federal prosecutor confirmed for 4 p.m. briefing. It's time, Miranda. I looked around our breakfast nook. The custom Italian tile I'd chosen, the designer light fixtures, the view of the garden I'd spent years cultivating. David thought I'd gotten all this in the divorce. He had no idea I'd bought this house 5 years before we even met, that the deed had always been in my name, hidden behind the same network of trusts and LLCs I'd used to build my real life. The life he knew nothing about. My fingers traced the embossed letterhead on the divorce papers. Morrison and Associates, one of the top family law firms in the city. Expensive. David must have dropped $30,000 just on the retainer. Money he'd stolen from the company, from patients, from people who trusted Hartford Medical Systems to provide life-saving equipment, not line the pockets of its corrupt CEO. I pulled out my laptop and opened the encrypted folder I'd been building for the past 3 months. Spreadsheets showing the phantom vendors, the inflated supply contracts, the kickback schemes that had funneled over $12 million into offshore accounts. David's signature on every fraudulent document, his initials on every approval form. And the communications? God, the communications. David wasn't just stupid enough to use his work email for the affair. He'd used it for everything. Every bribe, every falsified report, every illegal deal. All documented in corporate servers that his IT department thought were secure. They were secure from outside hackers. They weren't secure from the company's largest silent shareholder. My phone rang. Mrs. Thorne? The voice was crisp, professional. This is Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We received your evidence packages this morning. I have to say, in 15 years with the Bureau, I've never seen such thoroughly documented fraud. Thank you, Agent Chen. I walked to the window, watching a cardinal land on the garden fence. My background is in forensic accounting. I know what you need for an airtight case. Your background is fascinating, actually. I could hear papers rustling. MIT grad, top of your class. 5 years at Morrison and Klein? Wait, the Morrison and Klein? The white-collar crime specialists? Before they were famous, yes. I smiled at the irony. The same Morrison whose name was on David's divorce papers had trained me in corporate investigations. We'd parted on good terms when I decided to go into private consulting. Very private consulting. And then you just disappeared from the professional world, Agent Chen continued. Married David Thorne, became a housewife. I became exactly what I needed to be, I corrected softly. Is the briefing still scheduled for 4? Yes, but Mrs. Thorne, Miranda, I have to ask. You've been sitting on evidence of massive fraud for months. Why wait until he served divorce papers? I closed my eyes, remembering the moment I'd first suspected. 18 months ago, David had come home buzzing with excitement about a new supply contract. The numbers he'd mentioned hadn't made sense. Too high for the volume, too convenient for the vendor. I'd logged into the shareholder portal that night, following the digital breadcrumbs that led to a web of corruption so vast it made my stomach turn. I had to be sure, I told Agent Chen. And I had to know if he'd do the right thing. I gave him opportunities to come clean. Anonymous tips to the board, carefully placed questions about accounting irregularities. Every time he doubled down, got better at hiding it. And the divorce papers? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Were my proof that he's not just corrupt, he's cruel. I opened my eyes, watching the cardinal fly away. He waited until he'd hidden enough money to ensure his comfortable life with his mistress. The divorce settlement he's offering me? It's pennies compared to what he's stolen. He's using me as cover, making sure the wronged wife is taken care of while he starts fresh with his new life. Built on blood money, Agent Chen said quietly. Hartford Medical Systems provides equipment to hospitals, I continued. Surgical tools, diagnostic machines, emergency systems. Every dollar David skimmed, every inferior part he approved to collect kickbacks. Those decisions affected real people. Patients. The file in front of me contained more than just financial crimes. buried in the evidence was a pattern of equipment failures, all tied to the substandard supplies David had approved. 3 patient deaths, dozens of complications, all traced back to faulty equipment from the vendors paying him off. The briefing is at 4, Agent Chen confirmed. But Miranda? I need you to act normal today. Don't tip him off. Can you do that? I've been acting normal for 18 months, I said. I can manage 6 more hours. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my kitchen, in my house, built with my money, and let myself feel the weight of what was coming. By tonight, David's world would implode. Federal charges, asset seizures, the spectacular fall of a corporate golden boy. And me? I would finally step out of the shadows. My second phone buzzed, the one David didn't know existed, registered to one of my holding companies. A message from Marcus. Board meeting moved up to noon. They're getting nervous about the audit findings. I smiled. Marcus Chen, no relation to Agent Sarah Chen, was the CFO of Hartford Medical Systems. He was also one of the few people who knew that the company's mysterious largest shareholder wasn't a venture capital firm or a foreign investment group. It was me. Buying into Hartford had started as due diligence when David and I first started dating. I'd learned the hard way that people weren't always what they seemed, and I wasn't about to marry someone without understanding their professional life. What I'd found was a company with solid fundamentals, but terrible management. Ripe for the kind of strategic intervention I specialized in. I'd bought in quietly, through layers of corporate structures, accumulating 38% of the company over 8 years. Enough to have serious influence, not enough to require public disclosure or board membership. I'd pushed for reforms through proxy votes and shareholder resolutions, watching the company transform from a struggling medical supplier into an industry leader. David had taken credit for all of it, naturally. Every strategic initiative I'd guided through shareholder pressure, every operational improvement I'd funded through capital investments, he presented them as his visionary leadership. The board had loved him. Until 3 months ago, when I'd quietly suggested they hire an independent auditing firm. Not the usual rubber stamp consultants, but real investigators with forensic capabilities. Tell the board I'll be there, I texted Marcus. In person this time. 3 dots appeared then. You're sure? Once they know who you are, there's no going back. There's already no going back. I had 3 hours before the board meeting. 3 hours to transform from Miranda Thorne, abandoned housewife, into Alexandria Gray, forensic accountant and corporate investigator. Back into the person I'd been before I'd decided to marry David and step out of the spotlight. Upstairs, in the back of my closet, I pulled out the garment bag I'd been saving. The tailored suit inside cost more than David's car payment. My real car, the one he'd never seen, was already parked in the executive garage downtown, registered to one of my consulting firms. I caught my reflection in the mirror as I dressed. 9 years of playing small had made me forget how it felt to stand at my full height, to meet my own eyes without the protective camouflage of deliberate mediocrity. The woman looking back at me now wasn't trembling. She was ready. My phone rang, David's number. I let it go to voicemail, listening to his message with detached amusement. Miranda, I know this is hard, but please don't make this difficult. Just sign the papers. We can both move on with our lives. I'll be home late tonight. Dinner with investors. Don't wait up. Dinner with investors. He had no idea that his largest investor would be at that very same restaurant, sitting in a private dining room with federal agents and Hartford's board of directors. I'd chosen the venue carefully. Luciano's was David's favorite. The place where he'd proposed, where we'd celebrated every anniversary, where he'd taken Vanessa for their first public dinner 3 weeks ago. The maitre d' had been very helpful with security footage when I'd asked. For a price, of course. Everything had a price. The encrypted laptop in my home office contained 9 years of careful documentation. Not just the recent fraud, but a complete financial history of our marriage. Every gift I'd given him that he thought came from his salary. Every investment I'd guided that he believed was his genius. Every door I'd opened that he'd walked through without looking back. I'd built him up because I'd loved him. I'd documented everything because I'd learned to protect myself. The cardinal was back on the garden fence. I watched it for a moment, remembering the morning David and I had closed on this house. He'd been so proud, thinking his signing bonus had made it possible. I'd let him believe it because maintaining the illusion had seemed kind. Kindness, I'd learned, was often mistaken for weakness. At 10 a.m., I drove downtown in my Honda Civic, the car David knew about, the modest vehicle that fit his narrative of his struggling wife. I parked 2 blocks from Hartford Medical Systems and walked the rest of the way, my heels clicking against the pavement with satisfying precision. The lobby receptionist didn't recognize me. Why would she? I'd attended exactly 3 company events in 9 years, always as the quiet wife in the background, always in David's shadow. "I'm here for the noon board meeting," I told her, handing over a business card. Not Miranda Thorne. Alexandria Gray. Gray and Associates Consulting. Her eyes widened as she scanned the card. "Ms. Gray, I'll notify Mr. Chen immediately. Please, have a seat in the executive lounge." The executive lounge offered a perfect view of the main entrance. At 10:45, I watched David arrive, his arm around Vanessa as they walked from the parking garage. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand on his chest, her engagement ring catching the light. Engagement ring. He'd proposed to her before even filing for divorce. My phone captured 3 photos before they disappeared into the elevator. Evidence, though I hardly needed more at this point. Marcus found me 15 minutes later. "You look different," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I've seen your photo in the shareholder documents, but in person, I look like someone who knows what she's doing?" I smiled. "That's intentional, Marcus. Thank you for your discretion these past months. Thank you for saving this company." He glanced at his tablet. "The audit results are devastating. David's fraud goes back 6 years, minimum. The board is panicking about liability, regulatory scrutiny, stock price impact. How much do they know about the largest shareholder's involvement? They know you pushed for the audit. They don't know why you cared so much." Marcus studied me carefully. "They definitely don't know you're David's wife. They will in 45 minutes. I stood, straightening my jacket. "Is the evidence packet distributed?" "Every board member has a copy. The preliminary findings at least. 8 million in confirmed fraud. Another 4 million under investigation. They had all weekend to review it. And David? Scheduled to present his quarterly report at 12:15, right after you reveal the audit findings." Marcus shook his head. "He has no idea what's coming." "Good." I checked my reflection in the polished chrome wall panel. Power suit, subtle makeup, hair in a sleek bun. This was the woman I'd been before David. Confident, competent, uncompromising. Let's go remind him. The boardroom was exactly as I'd seen it in video conferences. All dark wood and leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. 11 board members were already seated, their conversations dying as I entered with Marcus. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, "may I introduce Alexandria Gray, founding partner of Gray and Associates and Hartford Medical System's largest shareholder." The shock was almost physical. Janet Wu, the board chair, recovered first. "Ms. Gray, we've communicated for years, but we had no idea you were local. I prefer to maintain my privacy." I took the seat at the far end of the table, opposite the chair reserved for the CEO. David's chair. Though circumstances have made that impossible to sustain. "The audit," Robert Klein, Hartford's lead counsel, leaned forward. You commissioned it personally? I did. 3 months ago, I noticed irregularities in vendor payments. As the company's largest investor, I felt obligated to investigate. I opened my laptop, connecting it to the presentation screen. What we found was significantly worse than accounting errors. The spreadsheets I'd prepared told a damning story. 12 years of financial data, with the fraud highlighted in red. The pattern was clear, even to non-accountants, a systematic looting of company resources that had accelerated over the past 18 months. This is catastrophic, Janet breathed. The regulatory fines alone could bankrupt us. Not if we act decisively, I countered. Full cooperation with authorities, immediate termination of the responsible parties, comprehensive reforms to prevent future fraud. Hartford can survive this, but only if we move fast. The responsible parties. Robert was studying the signatures on the fraudulent documents. These all route through the CEO's office. Yes. I pulled up another slide. David's approval chain, his initials on every compromised deal. Hartford's CEO has been systematically defrauding this company for over 6 years. The evidence is irrefutable. The door opened. David strode in, confident as always, Vanessa trailing behind with his presentation materials. He froze when he saw me sitting at the board table. Miranda, what are you doing here? The shock on his face was worth every moment of the past 9 years. Good morning, David. I smiled pleasantly. Please have a seat. We were just discussing your quarterly report. I don't understand. He looked around the table, seeking support. Finding none. Why is my wife in a board meeting? Your wife? Janet Wu's voice could have cut glass. Mr. Thorne, I think there's been some confusion about exactly who Ms. Gray is. Ms. Gray? David's eyes darted between me and the presentation screen, where his signatures glowed accusingly on screen. What is this? Miranda, what have you done? My name is Alexandria Gray, I said calmly. Miranda is my middle name. I use it socially. Professionally, I'm a forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud investigation. I'm also the majority shareholder of this company. And yes, David, I'm also your wife. Though I received your divorce papers this morning, so I suppose that's about to change. The silence in the room was absolute. Vanessa's iPad clattered to the floor. What? David's face had gone from shock white to angry red. You're lying. You're a paralegal. You don't even have a job. I haven't been a paralegal in 12 years. I advanced to the next slide. My credentials, my firm's client list, my stake in Hartford Medical Systems. I've been investigating you, David. For 18 months, I've been documenting every fraudulent transaction, every kickback, every compromised deal you've made. This is insane! David turned to the board. She's lying. I don't know what kind of game she's playing, but I built this company. Every success we've had has been because of my leadership. Your leadership? I almost laughed. Let me show you something interesting. The next series of slides detailed Hartford's strategic initiatives over the past 8 years. Each one I traced back to my shareholder activism, my capital investments, my carefully placed suggestions through proxy votes and anonymous board communications. The expansion into diagnostic equipment? I funded that through a Series C investment. The quality control overhaul? I pushed for that after analyzing customer complaint data. The partnership with Stanford Medical Center? I arranged that introduction through one of my consulting clients. David's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. You took credit for all of it, I continued. Every strategic win, every operational improvement, every successful initiative, you stood in front of this board and claimed them as your visionary leadership, when really you were just executing the roadmap I'd built. You're insane, David hissed. Delusional. You're just a bitter wife who can't accept that our marriage is over. Am I? I pulled up the final set of slides. Then explain these offshore accounts, the shell companies in the Caymans, the kickbacks from Meditech Solutions, from Biosupply Corp., from Harrington Medical Imports, the falsified quality reports, the substandard equipment you approved because the vendors paid you off. Bank statements filled the screen. Wire transfers. Emails with subject lines like, our arrangement, and additional compensation. David's personal email address on every incriminating message. 3 patients died because of equipment failures, I said quietly. Equipment you approved despite quality control warnings, because approving it earned you $200,000 in kickbacks. Janet Wu stood abruptly, her face pale. Mr. Thorne, you're suspended immediately, pending criminal investigation. Security will escort you from the building. Vanessa. She turned to David's secretary, who looked ready to faint. You're on administrative leave while we determine your involvement. You can't do this! David slammed his hands on the table. I'm the CEO. I made this company what it is. You nearly destroyed it, Robert corrected coldly. And if Ms. Gray's evidence is as thorough as it appears, you'll be facing federal charges within days. I strongly suggest you lawyer up. Security appeared at the door. I'd texted them 5 minutes ago, knowing exactly how this would play out. David looked around wildly, seeking an ally. Finding none. Miranda? He tried, his voice suddenly desperate. Baby, we can work this out. Whatever you think I did, we're married. You can't testify against me. Actually, I smiled. Spousal privilege doesn't apply to financial crimes when the spouse is the company's largest shareholder and thus a victim of the fraud. My lawyers were very thorough in explaining that to me. Besides, I added, watching him being led toward the door. After 9 years of marriage, I've learned something important. The person you've been lying to the longest is the one who has the most evidence, and I've been very, very patient about collecting mine. As security escorted David from the boardroom, Vanessa scrambling to follow, Janet Wu turned to me with something like awe in her expression. Ms. Gray? Alexandria, I have to ask, when did you know? About the fraud? 18 months ago. I began packing up my laptop. About David? I've always known in some way, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I thought if I supported him, if I helped him succeed, he might become the man I hoped he could be. Instead, he became a criminal, Marcus observed. Instead, he revealed who he'd always been. I looked around the boardroom, the company I'd invested in, the future I'd protected. The question now is what Hartford does next. Janet Wu straightened her shoulders. We cooperate fully with authorities. We implement every reform Ms. Gray recommends, and we ask if she'd consider taking a more active role in the company's leadership. A board seat? I considered it. Under my real name, not hidden behind corporate structures? Hartford needs someone who actually cares about doing things right, Robert added. Someone who's proven they'll do the hard work of protecting this company. That's you. Through the boardroom windows, I watched David being escorted across the parking lot, Vanessa crying beside him. His shoulders were slumped, his confidence shattered. The man who'd handed me divorce papers 6 hours ago was about to lose everything. His job, his reputation, his freedom. And all because he'd underestimated the woman he thought he'd married. I'll consider the board position, I told Janet. After we navigate the immediate crisis. Speaking of which, I checked my watch. Federal agents will be here at 4 p.m. to execute a search warrant. I suggest we have all financial records ready for their review. You've already coordinated with the FBI, Marcus stated. It wasn't a question. 3 months ago, Agent Sarah Chen is leading the investigation. She has copies of everything I found, plus additional evidence from her own inquiry. I smiled slightly. I believe in being thorough. The board meeting dissolved into emergency planning sessions. I stayed for 2 hours, providing guidance on crisis management, media response, regulatory compliance. This was the work I'd trained for, the career I'd set aside to play David's perfect wife. It felt good to be back. At 3:30, I excused myself and drove to Luciano's restaurant. The private dining room I'd reserved was waiting, elegant and discreet. Agent Chen arrived 10 minutes later, followed by 2 federal prosecutors and a team of investigators. "Mrs. Thorne," Agent Chen greeted me. Or should I say, Ms. Gray. "Alexandria is fine." I gestured to the evidence binders I'd prepared. "Everything's organized by date and category. Financial fraud, kickbacks, falsified documents. The patient deaths are detailed in Section 7, with full documentation of the equipment failures and David's approval of substandard supplies." One of the prosecutors whistled low. "This is the most organized case file I've seen in 20 years. You could teach our investigators a thing or two." "I'd be happy to consult," I said seriously. "After everything's resolved." Agent Chen opened one of the binders, scanning the contents. "You know, most people in your position would have just filed for divorce and moved on. Why did you go this far?" I thought about the 3 patients who'd died, about the families who'd trusted Hartford Medical Systems to provide safe, reliable equipment, about the employees who'd worked hard while their CEO stole from the company. "Because David didn't just betray me," I said quietly. "He betrayed everyone who trusted him, and someone needed to hold him accountable." My phone buzzed, a message from David. "Miranda, please call me. We can fix this. I'll make this right. I love you." I showed it to Agent Chen, who photographed it for evidence. "Too late for that," she observed. "Way too late." I silenced my phone. He made his choices. Now he gets to live with the consequences. At 4 p.m. precisely, federal agents descended on Hartford Medical Systems. David's office was sealed, his computers seized, his files packed into evidence boxes. By 4:30, he was in an interrogation room at the FBI field office, facing questions he couldn't charm his way out of. I watched from the observation room, Agent Chen beside me. Through the one-way glass, I could see David's panic growing as he realized the scope of the evidence against him. The offshore accounts he thought were hidden, the emails he thought were deleted, the witnesses who'd already been interviewed, vendors he'd pressured, employees he'd intimidated, accountants who'd raised concerns and been silenced. "He's going to try to make a deal," Agent Chen predicted. "Roll on his co-conspirators, reduce his sentence." Let him try. I checked my watch. His co-conspirators include 3 vendor CEOs who've already been arrested in coordinated raids. 2 of them are already cooperating. David has nothing to trade. You really did think of everything. I had 18 months and unlimited resources. I watched David's lawyer arrive, watched the brief whispered conversation, watched David's face crumble as he understood the reality of his situation. I used them well. My phone rang. Janet Wu. "Alexandria, I thought you should know. We're calling an emergency shareholder meeting for tomorrow. The board wants to formally appoint you as interim CEO while we search for David's replacement." "I appreciate the confidence," I said carefully. "But I'm not sure I want to run Hartford permanently. My consulting work—" "Keep your consulting firm," Janet interrupted. "But Hartford needs someone who knows the company, who's already saved it once. Even as interim CEO, your involvement would stabilize our stock price and reassure our customers." Through the glass, David was being read his rights. Miranda rights, appropriately enough. "I'll do it," I decided. "Interim CEO, with the understanding that I'm focused on crisis management and reform, not permanent leadership." "Done. We'll announce it tomorrow morning, ahead of the charges being filed." Janet paused. "Alexandria? I'm sorry about your marriage. This can't be easy, no matter what he did." "Thank you." I ended the call and turned to Agent Chen. "When will charges be filed?" Tomorrow afternoon. We want to execute search warrants on his personal properties first, including your house, I'm afraid. Though since you own it outright, you'll be able to stay. Take whatever you need. I'd already removed anything personal I wanted to keep. The home office is where he kept most of his records. The laptop in the desk drawer should have his personal financial files. You really have been investigating him. Agent Chen shook her head admiringly. Remind me never to commit crimes in your vicinity. Noted. I watched David's interrogation for another few minutes, then left. I'd seen enough. Outside Luciano's, the evening air was crisp and cool. In 12 hours, I'd gone from abandoned housewife to CEO of a major medical corporation. David had gone from celebrated executive to federal defendant. The cardinal was back in my garden when I got home, perched on the fence as if it had been waiting. I poured myself a glass of wine, not David's expensive scotch, but a Sauvignon Blanc I'd been saving, and sat on the patio watching the sunset. My phone buzzed constantly, news outlets requesting comments, colleagues reaching out, friends who'd thought I was just a housewife expressing shock. I ignored most of it. Tomorrow would be soon enough for public statements and damage control. One message I did answer was from Marcus. Congratulations, boss. Hartford's lucky to have you. Hartford had me all along, I texted back. They just didn't know it. At 9 p.m., David called from jail. I let it go to voicemail, listening to his message with detached interest. Miranda, please. I know you're angry, but this is insane. I made mistakes, but you're destroying my life. Our life. Everything we built together. Everything we built. As if he'd contributed anything beyond his name and his ego. I deleted the message and blocked his number. The divorce papers were still on the kitchen counter where I'd left them this morning, coffee-stained and forgotten. I picked them up, reading through David's proposed settlement with new eyes. The house I already owned. The accounts that were already mine. The alimony from a man who'd be in prison. It was almost funny. Instead of signing them, I drafted my own filing. Divorce on grounds of fraud and adultery, with a demand for complete financial transparency and asset accounting. My lawyer would file it tomorrow, once David's arrest was public knowledge. Let him try to hide assets from a forensic accountant who'd already mapped every dollar he'd stolen. The cardinal flew away as darkness fell, and I sat alone in the house that had always been mine, in the life that had always been mine, finally free to stop pretending. Tomorrow, David would be arraigned on federal fraud charges. Hartford Medical Systems would announce my appointment as interim CEO. The media would explode with the story of the housewife who brought down her corrupt husband. But tonight, I was just Alexandria Gray, the woman I'd always been beneath the camouflage of mediocrity. The woman who'd spent 9 years building a case, protecting a company, and waiting for the right moment to step back into the light. David had handed me divorce papers at breakfast, thinking he was freeing himself from the burden of an unsuccessful wife. By dinner, I'd handed him the consequences of every lie he'd ever told, and I was just getting started. The arraignment was scheduled for 10 a.m. I arrived at the federal courthouse 40 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than David's legal retainer. The media circus outside was exactly what I'd expected. Cameras, reporters, satellite trucks creating a gauntlet I'd have to walk through twice. Ms. Gray, is it true you've been investigating your husband for over a year? Alexandria, how does it feel to be Hartford's new CEO? Did you know about the affair with his secretary? I kept my expression neutral, my stride confident. I'll have a statement after the proceedings, I told them, and pushed through the courthouse doors. Agent Chen was waiting in the lobby. Ready for this? I've been ready for 18 months. I followed her through security, into the courtroom where David's fate would begin to unfold. The courtroom filled quickly. Hartford's board members took seats behind the prosecution. Vanessa sat in the back, her eyes red-rimmed, her engagement ring notably absent. And David, David sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive suit replaced by prison clothes, his confidence replaced by raw fear. He saw me and his face crumpled. "Miranda, please." "All rise," the bailiff announced, cutting off whatever plea he'd been about to make. Judge Patricia Hendricks was known for her no-nonsense approach to white-collar crime. She reviewed the charges with clinical precision. Wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, falsification of corporate records, and, the one that made David flinch, manslaughter in the deaths of 3 patients due to criminally negligent approval of defective medical equipment. "How does the defendant plead?" Judge Hendricks asked. David's lawyer, a nervous man named Peterson who'd clearly taken this case before understanding its scope, stood shakily. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The arraignment proceeded with brutal efficiency. The prosecution outlined their case. 12 million in confirmed fraud, offshore accounts, kickbacks, falsified quality reports. They presented a timeline showing David's systematic looting of Hartford Medical Systems, his escalating fraud as he prepared to divorce me and start fresh with Vanessa. "The defendant represents a significant flight risk," the prosecutor argued. "He has access to offshore accounts, connections to foreign vendors, and every incentive to flee. The government requests remand without bail." Peterson tried to argue otherwise. "Your Honor, Mr. Thorne is a respected businessman with deep community ties. His wife is here in court. Their marriage demonstrates his commitment to remaining local." "His wife," Judge Hendricks said dryly, looking directly at me, "is also the forensic accountant who exposed his crimes and the primary witness for the prosecution. I don't think that argues in his favor, Counselor." I felt a smile tug at my lips. Judge Hendricks had done her homework. "Bail is denied," she ruled. "The defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial. Next court date is December 3rd for preliminary hearings." David twisted in his seat, staring at me with a mixture of betrayal and desperation. "Miranda, you can't let them do this. I'm your husband." "Not for long," I said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. Outside the courthouse, I gave my statement to the assembled press. Brief, professional, devastating. I discovered evidence of systematic fraud at Hartford Medical Systems 18 months ago. As the company's largest shareholder, I had a fiduciary duty to investigate. What I found was a pattern of criminal behavior that endangered patients and defrauded investors. I did what anyone in my position should do. I reported it to federal authorities and cooperated fully with their investigation. "What about your marriage?" a reporter called out. "My personal life is separate from my professional responsibilities." David Thorne made choices that had consequences. I simply ensured those consequences were appropriate to his actions. "Will you remain as Hartford's CEO?" "I'll serve as interim CEO while we implement reforms and search for permanent leadership. My priority is restoring trust in Hartford Medical Systems and ensuring this never happens again." The questions continued, but Agent Chen stepped forward, ending the press conference. As I walked to my car, my real car, a sleek Tesla that David had never known I owned, my phone buzzed with a message from Janet Wu. "That was perfect. Stock price already stabilizing. Board meeting at 2 p.m. "I'll be there," I replied. But first, I had one more stop to make. The storage unit I'd rented 3 years ago was in a nondescript facility 30 miles outside the city. Inside, I'd kept everything I couldn't risk David discovering: financial records, backup documentation, and personal items from my life before marriage. My MIT diploma, photos from my time at Morrison & Klein, awards from closed cases, evidence of the woman I'd been before I decided to disappear. I spent an hour in that storage unit, sorting through the remnants of my old life. Some items I would donate. Some I would destroy. But a few, the most important ones, I packed carefully to bring home. It was time to stop hiding. The Hartford Medical Systems Board meeting that afternoon was different from the morning's emergency session. This time, I wasn't revealing a crisis. I was presenting a solution. Our immediate priorities, I outlined, displaying my strategic plan on the presentation screen, are threefold: regulatory compliance, operational reform, and reputation management. I've already contacted the FDA, the SEC, and our major hospital partners to assure them of our commitment to transparency. Robert Klein reviewed my proposals with obvious relief. This is comprehensive. When did you prepare all this? I started planning 3 months ago, when I first commissioned the audit. I advanced to the next slide. I knew we'd need a crisis response plan. I just didn't know I'd be the one implementing it. About that, Janet Wu interjected. Alexandria, the board has discussed this extensively. We want you not as interim CEO, but as permanent leadership. You've already saved this company twice, once through your strategic investments, and again by exposing David's fraud. Who better to lead Hartford forward? I'd been expecting this. I appreciate the confidence, but I built my consulting firm for a reason. I value my independence, my ability to choose my clients and cases. What if you could have both? Marcus suggested. CEO with the flexibility to maintain your consulting practice. Hartford doesn't need a traditional CEO who's in the office 12 hours a day. We need a strategic leader who can guide the company while trusting our management team to handle operations. It was tempting. Hartford represented everything I'd worked toward: a company with real purpose, making products that saved lives. Under proper leadership, it could be a force for genuine good. Give me a week to consider it, I said, after the media storm dies down and we see how the regulatory investigations proceed. The board agreed, though Janet's expressions suggested she already knew my answer. That evening, I returned to my house, my sanctuary, now free of David's presence. Federal agents had completed their search that morning, removing boxes of evidence, but leaving the structure of my life intact. I walked through rooms that suddenly felt larger, lighter. The breakfast nook where David had served divorce papers. The living room where he'd entertained colleagues, all while stealing from their employer. The home office where he'd kept records of his crimes, never knowing his wife was keeping better records in a hidden safe. Everything was mine now. Truly, completely mine. My phone rang, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Miranda? It's Vanessa. I froze. Why are you calling me? I need you to know I didn't know. Her voice was thick with tears. About the fraud, about the stolen money. David told me he was getting divorced, that you'd separated months ago, that everything was legal and above board. I never meant to. I didn't know I was the other woman until I saw you at that board meeting. And now you know, I said flatly. I'm 26 years old. I thought I was in love with a successful man who chose me. Instead, I was sleeping with a criminal who was stealing money to fund our relationship. She sobbed. The FBI questioned me for 6 hours. My parents won't talk to me. I lost my job. My whole life is destroyed. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. Vanessa, I'm not the person you need to apologize to. I'm not the one who believed David's lies. I'm the one who documented them. The people you need to apologize to are the families of those 3 patients who died because David approved defective equipment. I know, she whispered. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. For my part in it, even if I didn't understand what I was part of. After she hung up, I sat in the darkening house, thinking about the collateral damage of David's choices. Vanessa, young and stupid. The Hartford employees who'd lose their jobs as the company downsized. The investors whose stock had plummeted. The families grieving loved ones who died because of faulty equipment. David had destroyed so much more than just our marriage. The next morning, I held my first all-hands meeting as Hartford's interim CEO. 300 employees packed the auditorium, their faces reflecting anxiety, anger, and confusion. I know you have questions, I began. About who I am, about what happened, about what comes next. I'm going to answer as honestly as I can. I told them my story, not the sanitized press version, but the truth. How I'd built my career in forensic accounting. How I'd fallen in love with David and chosen to step back professionally to support him. How I'd discovered his fraud and spent 18 months documenting it. Some of you are wondering if you're complicit, I continued. If you should have known, should have caught something. The answer is no. David was skilled at hiding his crimes. He had authority to approve transactions, access to systems, and the trust of this board. You weren't responsible for catching him. I was, as your largest shareholder. And I did. A hand raised. Thomas Chen from Quality Control. Those patients who died. We flagged those equipment batches. We said they didn't meet specs, but David approved them anyway. I know, I said quietly. Your reports are part of the evidence. You did your jobs. David chose to ignore you because the vendors were paying him off. That's not on you. What happens to Hartford now? Someone called from the back. We survive. I pulled up a slide showing our recovery plan. We cooperate fully with regulators. We implement every reform needed to ensure this never happens again. We reach settlements with affected families. We rebuild trust, one day at a time. And we prove that Hartford Medical Systems is bigger than one corrupt CEO. The applause was hesitant at first, then growing. These people wanted to believe in their company. I was giving them permission to try. After the meeting, Marcus pulled me aside. You're going to take the permanent CEO position, aren't you? Yes, I admitted. Someone needs to fix this mess. Might as well be the person who created it. You didn't create it. David did. I enabled it by hiding who I was. I looked out at the Hartford campus, the buildings I'd funded, the employees I'd protected. I thought I was being kind by letting him take credit. Instead, I gave him enough rope to hang himself and nearly destroy this company in the process. You also gave him enough evidence to convict himself, Marcus pointed out. Without your documentation, he might have gotten away with it. Maybe. I turned away from the window. But 3 people would still be dead, and I'd still have wasted 9 years on a man who saw me as a convenient cover for his crimes. Over the next week, David's case continued to unravel. 2 of the vendor CEOs he'd worked with took plea deals, testifying against him in exchange for reduced sentences. Bank records showed the offshore accounts I'd traced, containing not just the $12 million in confirmed fraud, but an additional $8 million that had been hidden even more carefully. $20 million. That's what David had valued more than our marriage, more than his integrity, more than 3 human lives. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, 15 years in exchange for full cooperation and asset forfeiture. The prosecutors countered with 30 years minimum, given the deaths involved. David refused, insisting on going to trial. He thinks he can win, Agent Chen told me over coffee. His lawyer's planning to argue that you entrapped him, that your investigation was motivated by marital spite rather than concern for the company. That's ridiculous. It's also predictable. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Wealthy white men don't believe they'll actually go to prison. Even with overwhelming evidence, David probably thinks he can charm a jury, make you look vindictive, walk away with probation and asset forfeiture at worst. Will it work? Not a chance. We have too much physical evidence, too many cooperating witnesses. But it might drag things out, make your life miserable for months. Agent Chen met my eyes. Are you ready for that? I thought about the past 9 years, the small humiliations, the constant undermining, the slow erosion of myself as I played the role of unsuccessful wife. Then I thought about the past 18 months, the meticulous documentation, the careful investigation, the strategic planning that had brought me to this moment. I've been ready for worse, I said. Let him try. The divorce proceedings were almost anticlimactic compared to the criminal case. David's lawyer tried to argue for alimony, claiming he'd supported me throughout our marriage. My lawyer responded with documentation showing every asset David thought was ours was actually mine. The house, the investments, even the art on the walls. Your client has no marital assets to claim, my lawyer stated in court. He lived in a house owned by Ms. Gray. He drove cars registered to her LLCs. He wore watches she bought him. The only thing he brought to this marriage was debt and criminal liability. Judge Morrison, handling our divorce, actually laughed. Mr. Peterson, are you seriously arguing that your client deserves alimony from a woman he was planning to abandon? A woman who owns every asset he thought he was dividing? The divorce was granted in record time. No division of assets, no alimony, no negotiation. Just a clean break from a man who'd never known me at all. I signed the papers in my lawyer's office, my hand steady. Miranda Thorne was officially dead. Alexandria Gray was all that remained. 6 weeks after David's arrest, Hartford Medical Systems held a press conference announcing my permanent appointment as CEO. I stood at the podium, cameras flashing, and outlined our path forward. Hartford made mistakes under previous leadership. We allowed fraud to flourish because we trusted the wrong person. That stops today. We're implementing triple-check systems for vendor approvals, independent quarterly audits, and a whistleblower hotline with protection for employees who report concerns. The questions came fast. What about the families of the patients who died? We've reached settlement agreements with all 3 families. The amounts are confidential, but I can tell you they're fair and they're paid from my personal funds, not company resources. Hartford's shareholders shouldn't bear the cost of one man's crimes. Your personal funds? How much are we talking about? $15 million, split between the 3 families. I met the camera directly. No amount of money can bring back their loved ones, but I wanted them to know that someone was taking responsibility for what happened. The press room erupted. $15 million was more than most corporate settlements for wrongful death. It was also every cent I'd calculated David had stolen, money I'd traced, frozen, and liquidated before he could move it. Blood money, returned to the families who'd paid for it with their lives. The trial began in March, 3 months after David's arrest. I testified for 2 days straight, walking the jury through spreadsheets, bank records, and emails that painted a damning picture of systematic fraud. David's lawyer tried to rattle me. Ms. Gray, or is it Mrs. Thorne? You seem confused about your identity. I'm not confused at all, I replied calmly. I'm Alexandria Gray, forensic accountant. I used my middle name socially during my marriage because I valued my privacy. Many people do the same. Or perhaps you hid your identity to spy on my client. I hid my identity because 3 previous relationships taught me that some men are more interested in my money than in me as a person. Your client proved that lesson correct. You admit you deceived him. I maintained professional privacy. I corrected. Everything in our marriage was legal. My assets were properly disclosed in our prenuptial agreement, which your client signed without reading. He assumed I was poor because I didn't correct his assumptions. I never lied about who I was. He never bothered to ask. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating. David Thorne stole $20 million. He approved defective equipment that killed 3 people. He did all this while blaming his wife for being unsuccessful, never knowing she was the reason he had any success at all. He's not a victim of entrapment. He's a criminal who got caught. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. David's sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Hendricks reviewed the evidence with clinical precision before delivering her ruling. Mr. Thorne, you held a position of tremendous responsibility. Hospitals trusted Hartford Medical Systems. Patients trusted your approval meant equipment was safe. Instead, you treated your company as a personal bank and your position as a license to steal. 3 people died because of your greed. She sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 30 years. David collapsed at the defense table, sobbing. I watched without emotion. 45 years meant he'd be 82 before he could even apply for parole. His life, as he'd known it, was over. Mine was just beginning. A year after David's arrest, Hartford Medical Systems was thriving. Stock prices had recovered. We'd won 3 major hospital contracts. Independent audits gave us perfect scores for compliance and ethics. I stood in my office, the corner office that had been David's, now redecorated with art I actually liked, and reviewed our quarterly reports. Revenue up 18%. Patient satisfaction scores at record highs. Employee retention improving every month. Everything David had claimed credit for building, I'd rebuilt legitimately. My phone rang. Ms. Gray, your 2 o'clock is here. Send them in. Janet Wu entered, followed by a woman I recognized from her resume. Dr. Sarah Martinez, currently CMO at Johns Hopkins, potentially Hartford's next CEO. Sarah, thank you for coming. I gestured to the conference table. Janet's told you about our leadership transition plans. She mentioned you're looking to return to consulting. Dr. Martinez sat, her posture confident. After cleaning up one of the biggest corporate frauds in medical device history, I imagine you have plenty of clients. More than I can handle alone, I admitted. Which is why I need Hartford in capable hands before I step back. We spent 2 hours discussing Hartford's future. Dr. Martinez was brilliant, clinically trained, operationally savvy, and passionately committed to patient safety. Everything David had pretended to be, she actually was. The board will want to meet you, I said finally. But I'll be honest, I think you're exactly who Hartford needs. After she left, Janet lingered. You built something special here, Alexandria. Are you sure you want to walk away? I'm not walking away. I'm returning to what I do best, investigating fraud, protecting companies, consulting on ethics and compliance. I smiled. Hartford will always be my largest investment. I'll stay on the board, maintain oversight. But day-to-day operations, that needs someone whose passion is medical technology, not financial investigation. Fair enough. Janet stood to leave, then paused. Have you heard from David? He sends letters sometimes, from prison. I hadn't opened any of them. Apparently, he's found religion. Wants to apologize, make amends, ask for forgiveness. Will you forgive him? I considered the question. Forgiveness implied that David had hurt me in some way that mattered. But you couldn't hurt someone who'd been documenting your crimes the entire time. I don't need to forgive him, I said finally. I need to forget him, and I'm working on that. 6 months later, Dr. Martinez took over as Hartford's CEO. I handed her the keys to my office, the corporate files, the strategic plans I'd built. Take care of this place, I told her. It matters. I will, she promised. And Alexandria? Thank you. For saving Hartford. For trusting me with it. For showing that doing the right thing matters. I left Hartford Medical Systems that evening, walking past the lobby where David used to hold court, past the boardroom where I'd revealed his crimes, past the executive parking space that had never been mine anyway. My consulting firm had a waiting list of clients now. Companies that wanted the woman who'd brought down David Thorne, who'd proven that fraud couldn't hide from thorough investigation. I had more work than I could handle, more opportunities than I'd ever imagined. And I had myself back. The woman I'd been before David, before the compromise and the careful hiding. Alexandria Gray, forensic accountant, corporate investigator, woman who didn't need to pretend to be less than she was. The cardinal was in my garden when I got home that evening, perched on the fence like an old friend. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. My phone buzzed. A message from Agent Chen. Saw the news about you leaving Hartford. Drink soon to celebrate? Absolutely, I typed back. I'm buying. Another message. This one from Marcus. The new CEO is settling in great. You made the right call. Dinner next week? My calendar was filling up with the life I'd put on hold for 9 years. Friends I'd neglected, colleagues I'd stayed distant from, opportunities I'd declined to maintain my cover. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more making myself small so someone else could feel big. David had handed me divorce papers thinking he was discarding a burden. Instead, he'd freed me to reclaim everything I'd set aside. As the sun set over my garden, my house, my life, my hard-won peace, I raised my glass in a silent toast. Not to revenge, which was too small a word for what had happened, but to justice, to truth, to the woman I'd been, the woman I'd pretended to be, and the woman I was becoming. David would spend the next 30 years in prison, learning that actions have consequences and wives aren't always what they seem. I would spend them building the life I'd always deserved, one truthful moment at a time. The cardinal flew away into the gathering dark, and I sat alone in my garden, finally free. Free to be exactly who I'd always been. Alexandria Gray, forensic accountant, corporate investigator, woman who'd turned her husband's betrayal into the greatest case of her career. And I was just getting started. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.